and welcome to Got Somme. Maybe for the first time, maybe you've come back after season 1 where we found the best bottle of $30 wine that we could find in Australia last year. But this year has been different. If you listen to the last episode, our Wendouree flight, we drank $800 worth of wine. Carlos is one of his favourite Australian wines. But this is, I guess, an introduction into what Got Somme is going to be in season 2, and that is chatting to the winemakers in Australia and abroad about the wine they're creating, what makes them unique, what makes them stand out, and what differentiates them between the other producers that you can find at your bottle store. And I have to admit this, we're here with Michael Dhillon. Hello, Michael.
Hello, good to be here. Thanks
I have to admit this. I had no idea what Bindi Wine was, never heard of Bindi Wines, but Carlos just came through when I suggested, what do you want to do for season 2? He said, I want to speak to the winemakers. You were the first. So hence you're the first here. He's like, Bindi Wines. And I was like, I don't know anything about Bindi Wines. So can you please give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are?
Yeah, well, thanks for being so frank. It's always nice to be told no one's heard of you before.
Well, no, not no one, just Angus.
No, but you're somebody, yes, not a nobody. No, it's not a surprise, really, because Bindi, I actually, for many years, have said that Bindi is an irrelevant winery. And I've kind of done that a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in many ways, it's kind of true. Like, we're not huge. You know, we probably make up to about 4,000 dozens, so what's that, 48,000, 50,000 bottles a year. We're not big. We're very small, in fact. And we don't have a cellar door. We don't have a cafe. We don't have a restaurant. We don't do open days. We don't turn up to a lot of places to serve wine. And we turn up to some, and we do the occasional thing like this. But what we've always done is engage with people in a personable way, which means that we've got really strong relationships with some people, but not heaps of relationship with loads of people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Bindi, a very kind journalist years ago said, small but beautiful.
That's a nice way to be described.
Yeah, so we'll take that.
Yeah, funny because the first time I've tried the Bindi, and it was quite interesting because I was working at dinner by Heston Blumenthal, and it was my first huge experience as a sommelier. And Heston Blumenthal comes into the restaurant, he looks at the wine list, and he picks the Costas Rhine back then. And I was like, oh, wait a second, this is a beautiful label. You know, like you have the man in the picture and the description in the back. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And anyway, every time he would come to the restaurant, would always be his wine. So the head sommelier would always order Bindi to have available for him.
I didn't know this. Did you know this?
I didn't know this. No.
So that was Heston Blumenthal's favorite Australian wine. He would drink a lot of good wine. He would go on to drink his Burgundies. He would drink on to drink his big Bordeaux's. He liked the big Californians, but Australian was Bindi. And we had like 10 Australian wines maybe. It was a small wine list, 300, 400 references always. And and Bindi was represented. So that's how I learned about Bindi. And when I was like, I'm going to Australia, I want to visit Bindi. We had Bindi, we had Mount Mary, we had Giaconda, we had Hill of Grace, Henschke, and a couple of others top producers, obviously in different parts of Australia. But I thought, well, Bindi, I want to go visit, and that's when I arrived in Australia. Bindi was the first winery that I visited. So
Very nice.
You didn't know that?
Yeah, I can leave now. I'm happy.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
So let's break that down. Did you know that your wine was served in the restaurant?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
In the Boston, you knew.
Yeah. And I guess that's been one of the things that we've always tried to do is just be good. Don't have to be big. Don't have to be known by everybody. Just when you're in the vineyard pruning a vine or ploughing under vine to remove weeds and whatever you're doing, it's slow, it's laborious, it takes a lot of time, is that what you're doing is to create something that has meaning. And it doesn't have to mean something to everybody. It just has to mean enough to certain people, and then it connects. Like, they obviously connected Heston in the restaurant here.
That's awesome.
An engagement there. That endorsement then meant something to you. And then you come to Australia, and then then we build a rapport. And now you do all the wonderful work you do in Australia in various formats, and you take that energy to those people and share that energy. Yeah. And I think that's that comes from
the word of mouth. Yeah,
the word of mouth, but also authenticity. I think that people want to believe and know that something that they feel a connection to, is authentic and valid.
Would you say that your Bindi Wines, and you do have your own Dhillon as well, do you think that the idea of quality over quantity would be a sentence that kind of sits well with you and your winery?
Always. Yeah. And it's really tempting, when you've been making wine, we've been doing it for 30 odd years, 33 years, that you make a wine and it sells out, you think, I'd love to have more. I remember a conversation really early days for us, and we were selling the wine out really quickly. It shocked us that the restaurant market and the journos embraced us really quickly. Right? And it sells faster now, but it used to sell out really quickly, which surprised us. And I remember talking to a winemaker who said, if you sell out on the 364th day of the year, you haven't made enough wine. And I was like, I want to sell it on the first day of the year, which is not quite what we do now. We make these other wines now, yeah. And it's lovely to supply people. But the notion is for us that, do what you do it well. And if there's an audience out there that takes it up, well, whether it's in 1 day or 1 week or 1 month, whatever, that's fine. You can't, for us, run this type of small vineyard operation trying to satisfy demand all the time. And it just doesn't work. It shouldn't work.
Is that counterintuitive then to the idea that Bindi Wines is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir? That's the label gets Bindi, but you have Dhillon and you have Riesling, Rosé, accidental reds, Shiraz,
Grenache.
Is that you countering then? Is that you then going, well...
A little bit. It's nice. Also, I do love selling wine.
Of course.
I love engaging with people who want to buy wine. I love writing an invoice. All those things that, we need money to turn over to be able to run our business well and do more dynamic things. So it's important that you have a business that works. And the better your business can work, the more you can do for your environment, but also your business and people. So that's very satisfying to do that. But also, it actually just really is nice having wine with people. I love going to restaurants, particularly regional restaurants and some of the better city restaurants that we work with, and going there and having our wine on the list and having that relationship and doing a delivery and handing over cases, staying for lunch and doing those things.
You see where the wines actually are.
It's lovely.
And you see the engagement probably that other guests have with your wines as well, no?
But also I think it's obtainable. Like there's an idea that if your Bindi wines are at a price point that a lot of people can't afford, or maybe you sell out so quick, maybe you're not, at the bottle stores that someone can get at, so they wouldn't really know your presence. Whereas if you are providing a wine that is affordable and good, that still represents the Dhillon name in this respect, I think it's not necessarily, but when I said that question, it wasn't based around financial. It was based around whether you still felt comfortable releasing a price point of wine around that $30 mark that represents who you are, that still... Because people will associate Dhillon a little bit with Bindi, of course.
They do, and plenty of people put on their wine list, such and such by Bindi or Bindi, quote
of
unquote,
course.
whatever the wine. And okay, that's a communication that's helpful in that environment. My feeling is that we did 10 years with nothing else but just Bindi, Chardonnay and Pinot. Then we introduced the Perret. We had a couple of really bad frosty years and we lost a lot of crop. So we had this thing for that year that would fill a bit of space. Yeah. And it worked so well. People said, we really like the style of wine, and you're doing it again. It's like, okay, we'll do it again then. We weren't getting frosted out, but we did it again. And Perret's been a staple now for over 20 years for us. Yeah. And it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that we've started the Dhillon label to do the Riesling, the Rosé, and a few other bits and pieces, and Grenache Shiraz, and Accidental Red. And it's only been a recent thing, and I feel that I wouldn't have had the confidence to do that in the first 10, 15, 20 years of my winemaking journey, that we were so focused on getting Bindi right, and that was taking all our attention and energy. But also I've come to understand that after 25 years or so, that my palate sense of balance and ease and what I would think is deliciousness, I don't want to make wine that's too heavy or strong or too light or lean. I like wine that sits right in the middle, that is delicious. And I feel now with the right fruit sources that we can make wine that means that to us, and there's enough people out there that that's meaningful to. And I wouldn't have trusted that when I was 15 or 20 years into winemaking, but I trust that enough now, having seen it work. A lot of the things we do at Bindi are done because we've just seen them work. If it works, we've proven it. And so, and now I think, we can make these other wines, and the Riesling in particular, it's not this or it's not that. It's not super lean, it's not super heavy or extracted or evolved. It's just treads a middle ground that is very satisfying. Yeah. And we can arrive there now.
Where is the Riesling located, for example, in the Macedon?
So it's the far north end of the Macedon Ranges. So obviously Bindi on the western side of Mount Gisborne is on the southern end of the Macedon Ranges. It's sort of the first area of the Macedon Ranges you come to as you climb out of Melbourne. It's up to 500 metres where we are. And then directly north of us, we look out on is Mount Macedon, up to 1,000 metres above sea level, the pinnacle of Mount Macedon. And then on the other side, you move through volcanic soil to the northern boundary, up around past Kyneton, Glenhope, Bainton, and this area for this Riesling is on that granite soil. So it's slightly less elevation than us. It's about 425 metres. But it's really ideal with the bright sunshine they get up there, Riesling and obviously Merlot and Shiraz for the accidental red.
So that and would you say that bright sunlight? So you really have to measure very well when to harvest, for example, because maybe just too hot at some stage.
It can be, but the beauty up there is elevation still. So 425 metres above sea level means about 4 weeks later ripening than you would be at sea level. So basically every 100 metres you climb, it's like a week later in harvest for the same variety. So if you're growing it down on the flats near Melbourne, you might ripen something in mid-February. But if you're going up to the Macedon Ranges, you're ripening that at the very end of March or sometimes even early April for this area. So yes, blue skies, more bright sunshine than we have at Bindi, but still cold and slow and late. So
if you were to compare, for example, a great Riesling, which is out of a classic region like Clare Valley, for example, Crawford River, Riesling, for example. If you were to compare the region and to a Clare Valley, for instance, which is what most people know, and I guess the listeners, last year we had
a couple of Clare Valleys,
Clare Valley Rieslings, which is I think what people know worldwide as a Riesling from Australia. What would you say it's?
I think
the advantage.
The Rieslings from this northern end, of which there are a few, Lions Wheel, Knights Granite Hills, ours, a couple of people making from this vineyard Riesling, have a similar citric purity to them. In this vineyard and area, they can have a bit more texture and a bit more weight out the side. Crawford River definitely does that. And, Isolation Ridge, obviously, in the Great Southern in Western Australia,
that's right.
does a similar thing, has texture. But my feeling is that with the Riesling in this area, it's a starting point. And I think often Riesling is like that. And Belinda Thompson at Crawford River, does some fantastic things with wild yeast, with small oak and average size oak barrels and lees to use the starting point of this sort of citrus line and length with your blossom florals to work something out the side so you get more texture and palate feel. And then you can time on skins before pressing as well, to extract some phenolics. So there's a real opportunity in our area, in any area particularly, but in our area with these granite soil Rieslings to work out where you want to see the palate shape. How much do you want to bring the high down and push out the side? And for me, again, I'm probably a great fence sitter for wine styles. I don't like wine to scream out too far to the left or too far to the right. I love harmony and deliciousness. So for me, palate feel is really critical. Aromatics are very critical, and you do lose a bit if you use wild yeast, which we did on the Riesling. Slightly warmer temperature, let it get up, not too scared. Barrel fermentation and aging, and then time on lees. But big opportunity.
So Bindi Wines didn't start with you. You're the second generation of Bindi Wines?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a blurry crossover because I helped my dad plant the vineyards. We did that together in 1988, but it was his project. It was his inspiration. He'd moved from a sporting business he was in and sheep farming and wanted to put the vineyard in. I was a idle 20-year-old doing an economics degree at Monash, which I finished but never worked in. And so I said, I'll give you a hand. And all my uni mates are like, plant a vineyard? Great. In the holidays? Great. Do we get to barbecue and drink beer and drink wine and work together? Yes, of course.
Financial sense so let's just have fun and.
And we did. So we really learnt together. But it was very much Dad's project. And then I had the opportunity to be involved and help at the start. And then I fell in love with wine.
So do you think there's a beautiful saying that I'm going to misquote? So I don't know, it's so beautiful I can't remember it, but it's this idea that somebody else plants the seed for somebody else to enjoy the shade of that tree one day.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's sort of the idea of what Bindi Wines is? Your dad planted the seed for you now to sit under the shade, not, metaphorically, but theoretically.
Someone else will. I think Michael works too hard to sit under the shade.
He don't sit under the shade.
I think this.
But the idea is there that he planted something that now you enjoy the fruits literally of the labour.
In fact, the vineyard know But he did actually put in 14,000 eucalypts in a hardwood tree plantation in 2004 when the vineyard was 16 years old, for that very notion which he planted for his grandchildren, which we actually are managing at the moment and clearing and taking out trees and training up and doing. So there's a lot of work the 40-year window. So Dad did in fact plant the trees for the grandchildren, but the vineyard was very much about trying to do something to allow the farm or the land to perpetuate, because it had been sheep grazing when there was no money in sheep grazing. The land is not large enough or productive enough to run as a broad acre property where we are, and there's too much fragmentation around Gisborne. It's very close to Melbourne. Subdivision is a big thing, big pressure on land. And in fact, I suspect that around Gisborne there only might be 3 or 4 or 5 properties that actually run themselves off what they do on that land, and our vineyard being one of them. So Dad took the opportunity to plant a vineyard, to value add all the way up to the end point and sell some wine. Very much about trying to sustain our possibilities of remaining on the land.
Yeah. It's interesting. And then what was the first plantings? You were 12, right? No, 20.
Original.
I was 20.
20.
Yeah. So I was born in 68.
Yeah.
The vineyard was planted in 88, and we did Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Yeah, and
so,
that's what Bindi is famous for.
And that's what Bindi's famous for. That's all we grow at Bindi still. And we started off in the early 90s. In fact, 1991 was our first harvest. And we have just one Chardonnay and one Pinot Noir. And then as the 90s progressed, we had the Block 5 vineyard come on in 96. And in fact, in 95, I'd spent a lot of time travelling through Europe and making wine, and was, overwhelmed by this notion of somewhereness, of terroir, of sense of place. Tim Kirk at Clonakilly would say liquid geography, which is pretty cool. I reckon, liquid
That's
geography.
a great way to put
I really
it.
like that.
Definitely.
That's cool.
Tim's an inspiration.
Cool, yeah.
And so I was enamoured with that concept. So in 1995, we identified in a meaningful way the difference in geography in the Chardonnay blocks. And the quartz Chardonnay section up by our house is 480 million year old basis soil, mudstone, sandstone, clay, quartz rock. Lower down, same rows, same claims, same planting blocks, 5 million year old volcanic soil. Huge disparity in age and soil profile.
And you can see it as well when you're in the vineyard.
You see it clearly.
You have totally different breakdown on soil.
And you see the vine.
As you go up a little bit on
perform slightly differently. At the top, you see more open canopy, less vigour, smaller bunch, smaller berry. You go down lower, more fertility, more moisture, bigger bunch, bigger berry, more canopy. So in 1995, in fact, we moved away from making just one Chardonnay called Bindi Chardonnay, and we put a delineation line in the vineyard where the soil change occurred, and we started making the quartz from the old soil and the Costas Rind from the lower section, Bindi Chardonnay from the lower section. So up until that point, it was just one Chardonnay, one Pinot, and then we started to understand the nature of the geography, the differentiation in the way the vines would grow and the fruit would be, and so we started to make wine honouring individual parcels. And obviously that's extended now that we've got 6 different Pinots and still 2 Chardonnays.
I mean, every winery is unique in their own way, but geographically based, whether it comes down to, maybe your side of the hill gets more or less light, everything is sort of different in being unique. But if you were to define what makes Bindi Wines unique,
Yes.
What is it for you that stands out when someone is to say, how do you differentiate this Pinot from, Stonia and Mornington Peninsula?
Location is key. Vineyard site is key. You can delve into clones of Pinot Noir, specific types of cuttings taken from Pinot Noirs going back. Very important. But you can delve into that. You can delve into the canopy management, the trellis regime, narrow, close, high, low, crop loads, very important, yes. But trumping all those is vineyard site. And so for us, it's just great fortune. We didn't have the experience of anybody near us growing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and making Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in the mid-'80s when Dad decided to plant the vineyard, which we did in 88. There was no evidence in our area that Chardonnay and Pinot Noir would make good wine or terrific wine, or at least we know age-worthy wine. So that was a leap of faith. So we were just fortunate. And then once we'd taken that fortune, and then it was about maximising it. So just doing everything really carefully, really diligently through the farming, and then the winemaking. And obviously we had a great fortune when we first started to meet John and Anne Ellis at the Hanging Rock Winery, who were really formative in our region, developing, very encouraging of many vineyards and helping people make wine. And then Stuart Anderson, my winemaking mentor, came on to our project in 1991, and Stuart had retired from Balgownie Winery, which he started in 1969. We're a Renaissance vineyard in Balgownie in Bendigo. And Stuart retired to our area in 1991, which coincided with our first crop and a couple of other local vineyards having their first crop. And so I got to help make wine for the first time ever, working as Stuart's apprentice
Not a bad
in
place,
1991. Great fortune for me.
amazing,
And then obviously for the next 7 years, I worked alongside Stuart before we built our winery, and I took over the winemaking. Great fortune. So site maximised by hard work and mentorship.
Yeah.
Great. And is there any? Do you have any provision for expanding a little bit further the vineyards?
A little bit.
Around.
Not huge ambitions to try and meet demand, but certainly I'm really interested in what vineyard sites have to say. And over time, we've come to understand what it is on our side of the hill at our elevation, and we sit on the side of Mount Gisborne, what presents well with Chardonnay and Pinot. Like, I can almost look at a site now on our property and go, that's a good site. That one does what that one does there, but a bit higher, a bit lower, a bit tilted to the west or the north. So we've got a couple more sites to plant. We're only at 19 acres, like just under 8 hectares as it is at Bindi. There's about another 6 acres, so let's say 2.5 hectares of really interesting sites that I'd love to hear what they have to say. Like, I want to hear what their voice is through Chardonnay and Pinot. So we will, in about 2 or 3 years' time, we'll plant some more. Some will be close planted, some will be medium density as well. So there are things to do. But there's no rush, and it certainly isn't to try and meet the demand out there.
No, of course, It's the passion that you will show for the sites as well,
Can you just explain for me what's close and mid-harvest? What does that mean?
Yeah, density of planting. So let's say a typical Australian vineyard planted in the 1980s, thereabouts, would be about 3 metres wide and about 1 to 1.5 metres between vines. And that typically leads to 2,500 vines per hectare, or in the old speak, 1,000 vines per acre.
Yeah.
3 metres wide, 1.2 between vines. That's what we typically did. And we'd get like 1.5 kilos per vine of fruit and make 1.5 tonnes to the acre.
Yeah.
10 years ago, we prepared soils, deep ripped, and then configured vineyards and started planting in 2014. Vineyards 1.1 metres wide by 0.8. So we've gone from 3 metres wide to 1.1. So almost one third. Yeah. And then from 1.2 to 0.8. So what we've done, if you calculate the numbers out, we've gone to about 4,000 vines per hectare, per acre.
Yeah.
11,000 odd vines per hectare instead of 2.5.
Why wouldn't you always do close harvest then? Because you get more vines.
You get a lot more vines, but what you do is you get a tiny yield per plant, and there's been
because the nutrients are still...
and they're short and small.
They're shared,
and they're in direct competition with each other very quickly. So there's been an argument in Australia over many years why not to do this.
And it was also much easier to machine harvest, for example, for huge wineries, huge producers.
And all the equipment,
that was the knowledge, right?
And all the equipment's there, right? So when you've got an incumbent situation, there's reasons for it, and there can be a defence for it as well. So there was a lot of discussion over the years that close planting, the vines would be too vigorous. You wouldn't find a moderate balance in there. You'd get a vegetative growth, not a ripening growth, and so forth. So we were very fascinated to learn and know. And it was something that I'd really wanted to do from when I worked in Champagne in 1994 and spent a lot of time visiting vignerons in Burgundy and did a lot of work through France, where I saw a lot of close planted vineyards. And then Stuart Anderson had counselled me. He'd done a lot of vineyards in Burgundy and Bordeaux about these techniques and so forth. So it was something that we wanted to have a crack at. And in fact, before Dad passed away, we'd planned these vineyards to do that way. But it means you duplicate all your equipment because you can't get your other gear in there. It's too big. So you've got to duplicate equipment. And then once you've got the right equipment, you actually are following the same process. You're doing the same things in a narrow space that you would do in a wide space with soil management, foliage management, and so forth. But you're doing them in close proximity, massive competition between vine roots and vines, and it's in a different environment. It's more humid, there's more disease pressure, and there's more shading of the soil because there's this buffering, isn't there?
Yeah, they're buffering each other, yeah.
So it's quite a different environment. So that was another step that we took and which we do now. And so with some of our new plans, we will do some continuation of this, but not all. We also want to learn what happens in between. because we've got wider rows, we've got very narrow rows. What happens
What's
if
the
you go,
hybrid? Yeah.
What's in between? So there's greater practicalities, but you're also getting this lower yield per plant in proximity. And where does it sit? You know, it's not a simple conversation to say this one wins, that one loses. We did want to understand.
Yep.
So would you have to have a lot of canopy management, like
Heaps.
greening,
much.
shaving leaves off?
Taking out shoots.
have,
The main one is you've got a vine.
So it's a huge, triple time the huge of
Huge
triple
amount of
time triple time the work at least.
Well, it's at least 4.5 because you've got 4.5 times the number of vines,
Yeah,
right? So
that's
each
right.
one you've got to treat.
If it's close, yeah.
But then
That's
you've
right.
got extra work because when they're close, they're pushing out these extra shoots, and you've got to take those out because otherwise you get this blocked up canopy
Yeah.
and humidity.
No
Is this
sun.
basically pruning the plant? Is that?
Yeah, so you prune the plant in winter, but then also you in fact spring prune by shoot selecting and removing, and then even as the summer progresses, like you get one like this where it's so warm. And moist that you keep getting this new shoots coming out. So you've got to keep retraining. So there's a ton of work.
Can we talk about this year because it's fresh in our minds? It's February, so we've just gone through, or still kind of getting the end of summer. Summer started late in Victoria where we are.
It's out on the 23rd of December.
Did it? Is that when it just went crazy? That was the heat.
That's when the heat changed
But it was a cold.
and the rain stopped.
Yeah, it was cold up until
Yeah.
it felt really late. It felt like I remember like December came around. I'm like, this is not. We're wearing jackets going for a walk in the morning.
I remember talking to you.
Very
and like
unusual.
it's rainy.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So what does this year mean? Because it's fresh in our minds. We're in it still, probably.
Yeah.
What did it mean for Bindi Wines? How's this year been for you guys?
So, well, for us, it's been the most challenging 12 months we've experienced in our 35 years of running the vineyard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sure has. So we went from a very wet 2022 period for the leading up to our harvest in April. So March, April, huge amount of rain and disease pressure and difficulty leading up to the harvest. Thankfully, we made some really good wines, not in much volume, but good wines. Got through that just. And then we went through a moderately damp winter, but nothing exceptional. But then spring, vast amounts. Some people had 200-300 millimetres of rain in October, in October.
Jeez.
And very difficult to run a vineyard. And a lot of people got knocked around with the flowering. So the vines, they self-pollinate, but they flower in, typically for us, late November, early December.
It's severe.
For us, our flowering occurred in December over Christmas, which is very late. So typically,
where is he?
Mornington might flower in early November, mid-November. We would be late November into December. This year it was like 3 to 4 weeks later. So what it means is it
Everything
pushes
gets delayed,
everything back. So everyone's looking at a late harvest. This warm weather's been good, but again, we look out the window today and it's got grey skies again. And Friday's meant to only be 15 or 16 up where we are. Maybe Melbourne's 17.
Yeah.
And hopefully it doesn't rain again as well.
Yeah, well, we had damp, dewy, misty weather this morning and no blue sky. So super challenging year. But those people who have managed to hang on to healthy crops and good canopies could be good because a mild season often can be a great year. So there's a chance. We're still in the game.
So talking about from a financial perspective, not specifically to your winery, but 2019 is a good year. We'll speak about it because we're going to have a 2019 wine on the next episode when we taste a variety of your wines.
Terrific.
But 2019 was a good year.
Yeah, 2019 is like the antithesis of this year. So 2019, we had warmth, dryness after a wet start to spring. So we had good subsoil moisture, and then we got this dry, warm weather, which is really ideal in many ways because everything grows clean and grows strong, and you build this great engine, the green canopy of the vineyard, nice and strong and green. And we had a very good crop level. We had about 2 tonnes to the acre in 2019. And then it pushes through with this engine. And 2019 was warm, dry, and mild finish in the end, like the heat of the summer. I remember those fires that were there. It turned. So it turned to just a beautiful, even ripening period.
And then, so what I'm trying to get my head around is last year and got some, I'm learning how to assess wine. I've got my WSET level 2, so I'm getting an understanding of wine in the glass, but I don't understand wineries as a business. And this isn't necessarily what Got Some Season 2 is about, but a lot of people might think 2019 was a fruitful year for the vines, but also for the bank. But also, do you kind of have to...
Increase price or
yeah,
decrease as you...
Well, no, not even that. You have to kind of like supplement that with a year that you're not going to have the same fruitfulness. So like people might go, oh, good year, you're off to 6 weeks first class to Europe for a holiday. But realistically, this year you might not have the same sort of fruitful year financially. And I'm talking about 2022 for most wineries in this area.
Well, I reckon the easy one to follow on 2019 is to go to 2020. 2020 was wet and difficult. The springtime and then the harvest period were. So a lot of people in 2020 across Victoria had vastly reduced yields by half or even more in some instances. So often people went from a prolific 2019 to 2020. And what happens with vineyards is by the time 2020 comes along, you still got warehouses with some 2019s. You've still got some in barrel, in fact, that you're still bottling up. So you know what's coming. You've got this deficit in 2020, so you can manage your sales. But also we're farmers, so any farmer who thinks that 1 or 2 great years in a row is something to book first class and go overseas for 6 weeks is a fool.
So it is cost averaging though, right?
You've got to. You cost average, but you've got to smooth those revenues across years as well. And sure, some of those high years, you've got this bit of equipment you've been hanging out for. Okay, you buy it then, because you're not going to be buying it in your 2020 or your 2022. So you do those things, that are 10-year decisions, often even more.
And then you get some depreciation off them for the years. It might be a bit difficult.
Then the government gets hit with a pandemic and they get really generous and they give you 100% depreciation.
That's great.
On some things.
Thank you. We'll take that.
Yeah, well, sometimes you need it. Yeah.
Well, of course. Exactly. We're not high-fiving. We're just
we'll take
thanks.
it.
Yeah, we need to get through it. So can I ask you a couple of personal questions about you? You did speak about you've had mentors, you've traveled through France a lot to go and get but I find there's this whole idea that isn't necessarily based around wine, but is just based around life, which is you don't take your work home. You live at your winery. Your winery, there's no cellar door, there's no restaurant. You are on the property. Can you switch off, for one? 2, do you drink your own wine when you sit down on the couch for the night? And 3, how do you, in your relationships, separate being a dad, being a husband, being a partner, being whatever it is, versus having to be the guy who's the first to call? Yeah,
great questions. 3 of them, I'll try and remember all 3 and address them. Prompt me if I don't get to
Please.
But Bindi really for me is like, it's kind of my whole life in some ways, which is kind of a bit embarrassing to say in some respects. I'd like to think life's more than that. But I was born there. It's where I grew up. And it wasn't a vineyard when I grew up there. It was a sheep farming property, and it was a farm on the side of a town my family had been in for over 100 years by then, and it's 170 or so now. And so it's that context that I live there. And then we put the vineyard in, and then it becomes my job. So, it layers, family history, childhood, then it throws the job on top, and it's where my kids have grown up and my wife and I live. So there's so many layers to Bindi. They never turn off. And I think, how do you put a percentage on it? But let's say 95% of the time, I love that. Like, it's just great. I wouldn't want it any other way because I find it deeply enriching and deeply personal. But also that carries a lot of responsibility and a vulnerability as well. So, if we don't get Bindi right, it puts all those other things under the microscope.
That's right.
So it's a sort of great sense of, awareness of vulnerability that this means a lot and has to be done right and has to be done well enough. So I kind of honour that mostly, but every now and again I look over my shoulder and go, wow, that's a bit of pressure. But, I choose to take that pressure. That's not anyone else's choice. That's my choice. So I own that.
And you'll remember for that as well.
Yeah, I think people appreciate that.
For sure.
Yeah, I think people appreciate that, and I try and be really careful in that. That's just my experience. It's not more or less for anybody else to have different experiences. And my father came from the north of India. He was a long way away from where he was born and grew up and family were. He had an amazing life. And, I admire my father so much and honour him with the wine that we do darshan today. So there's no competitiveness at all ever in how we get to live and what we get to do, or only a little bit of deprecation that it is in ownership. I feel owned at times by it.
Do you drink your own wine when you're at home, or do you use as an opportunity to see what else is out there?
We only tend to drink our own wine when we have other people around that might be important to show them the wine, or we've got something that we particularly want to share with someone and get their opinion, or just have the joy of sharing it. So we do in those circumstances, but very rare that we would ever open a bottle of wine just as a family sitting around to do that.
Really, it's just a dinner table set. You've got like a roast chook on the no wine.
No, well, yeah, we got wine, but it's not ours. It'll be something from a friend, like a colleague in the industry. We've got lots of really good friends in the industry who whose wines we respect and enjoy a lot, and we swap or buy and sell. So we've got plenty of those to draw on. And then I have an indulgence. I don't have too many indulgences in life. I'm not into fast cars
Other than
or
Burgundy or wine.
well, that's it. Yeah. So Carlos has just named it. So, but typically, it'll be very good Riesling from around the world. We've got some friends who import some great German Rieslings or Austrian Rieslings, which I really enjoy. So happy to buy and sell of those. Burgundy is a place I've spent a lot of time in, visited over 100 different winemakers in Burgundy, several of them many times. And my cellar has a lot of interesting Burgundies from people I admire and enjoy. And I find that incredibly stimulating to calibrate my palate in this space of where high quality Pinot Noir
Chardonnay,
sit and Chardonnay sits. So when I try our wines, if they fit into an instinctive feeling of quality in my mind and heart, even my wine heart, I go, yeah, okay, I feel good about that. So I find that really important. And a lot of that came about hanging out with Stuart Anderson a lot, tasting great wines. Back in the day when I worked for Paul de Bergday, he was an importer of wine in the 90s. He was very generous. And even Anne and John Ellis at Hanging Rock, who we spent a lot of time with in the late 80s, early 90s, were very generous in opening their sort of wines. Over the years, I've got to try some great things. And I like that sensibility. I actually really like opening those wines now for lots of other people and sharing them around. And that's the context that we drink wine in.
The next episode, we're going to be tasting the wines, which people can see on our Instagram if you're watching this, or people can see on YouTube that are in front of you. We're going to try a bunch of different wines. But if people, maybe miss that next episode by, whatever, and they just want to learn what encapsulates Bindi Wines for you as sort of a legacy of who you are, your parents are and were, what do you think best describes your brand to you? Not necessarily what the consumer thinks about what you are, but what does it mean for you?
Oh, if you sort of just throw up a few words that summarise what I'd like it to be and hope it to be, I'd like it to be considered to be authentic and harmonious.
It's a good word.
Yeah. So I think Bindi is really simple in that there's a particular place that it is. And it's a landscape, and it's a landscape that was managed for a long, long time by very caring, passionate people with amazing culture. It's been managed by our family in a caring way, in a way that we continually look deeper and deeper, how we can respect all of those timelines of people and place and environment, with vineyards, with native grasses, with First Nations people, with farm forestry, carbon capture, all these things that are possible, and with family, family and friends. And then there's Bindi the drink, which would be about joy. Like really, we can capture the beauty of the landscape, the works that go on, our care for wine, and put that in a bottle, and people, whether they want to look deeply or not, can just have joy, going as far as you want or not, just take the glass of wine and enjoy it. And that comes down to the harmonious nature of the wine. So I think if we can get those two things fulfilled, we're going about as far as I need to go.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, you can't go anywhere. We have another episode up next where we are going to be trying, in a couple of weeks, depending on when you're listening to this, that we will be trying your wines. Carlos has rated them amongst his favourites. You were the first person name on the sheet at the end of last year when we finished up, got some season one of how we're going to tackle this year. And so it made sense to kick it off with you and Bindi Wines. And I'm excited to learn not only about Bindi Wines, but also your secondary wine, Dhillon Wines as well, and where you're expanding with whites, rosés, and everything in between. So, and the accidental red does seem to be a label that captures my imagination. So I'm looking forward to hearing the story of that. So until the next episode of Got Some, if you're watching this, Michael Dhillon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.